you're watching this, you probably had to. Not because this video was magically placed in front of you, but because there are certain spiritual principles you may need to hear right now. And most people completely overlook them. Some of them are so easy to miss that even people who have been on this path for years never fully notice them. Have you? The spiritual path does not always become harder because you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it becomes harder because you can finally see what you once had the ability to ignore. You notice when your actions do not match what you claim to value. You recognize when someone's words sound good, but their behavior says something completely different. You feel the weight of decisions you once made without thinking twice. Greater awareness gives you more clarity, but clarity also gives you more responsibility. Once you see something clearly, pretending not to see it becomes exhausting. This is the unexpected part of spiritual growth. Life may not become immediately easier. It can temporarily feel more demanding because you are no longer moving through it unconsciously. And this is something you will have to learn how to live with, because awareness is not a temporary feeling you can turn off when it becomes inconvenient. It changes what you can tolerate, what you can excuse, and eventually, what you are willing to choose. There is a stage of awakening that almost nobody talks about because it doesn't feel exciting while you're living through it. In fact, many people mistake it for losing their passion or falling off their path when the opposite is happening. It is what I like to call the alchemy stage. This is the point where your relationship with difficulty begins to change. Instead of constantly asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you naturally begin asking a much more powerful question. What is this building inside me? That single shift changes everything. The situation itself may not be any different. You can still experience disappointment, rejection, setbacks, or uncertainty. The difference is that those experiences stop becoming evidence that life is against you. Instead, they become material. They become something you can work with. Think about it this way. Fire can destroy, but it can also shape metal into something stronger than it was before. The fire is not automatically good or bad. What matters is what it leaves behind. The same is true for your life. The strongest people are not the ones who avoided hardship. They are the ones who stopped wasting it. When you enter this stage, you stop measuring every experience by whether it feels pleasant. You begin measuring it by what it teaches you, what it reveals, and what it quietly strengthens inside you. That is a completely different way of living, and once you experience it, it becomes very difficult to go back to seeing every challenge as an attack on your peace. Now, there is one mistake that people make after hearing a message that truly resonates with them, and it quietly ruins the impact before anything has a chance to grow. They immediately feel like they have to do something dramatic. They convince themselves they need to make a huge decision today, change everything overnight, or completely reinvent their lives while the feeling is still fresh. But inspiration is not something that has to be chased before it disappears. In fact, forcing action too quickly often replaces clarity with impulse. One clear thought that stays with you is far more valuable than 10 rushed decisions you will question tomorrow. Real change rarely begins with the biggest decision. It begins with the decision that survives after the emotion fades. So before you rush back into your day, before you start searching for another video or another answer, let one idea from today remain with you. carry it into the rest of your day. Let it challenge the way you think, the way you react, and the way you make your next decision. Sometimes, the smallest shift in perspective ends up becoming the biggest turning point. Not because it was dramatic, but because you actually allowed it to stay. There is another stage that catches people completely off guard because it doesn't feel spiritual at all. One day, you suddenly feel an almost irrational need to start clearing things out. You look at clothes you haven't worn in years and wonder why they're still there. You scroll through old photos and realize they no longer mean what they used to. You find yourself deleting notes, cleaning drawers, throwing away random objects, even removing contacts from your phone without spending much time thinking about it. At first, it can seem strange because nobody told you this might happen. You assume you're just in a cleaning mood. But very often, there is something deeper taking place beneath the surface. Your environment has a way of holding on to unfinished versions of your life. Every object, every forgotten folder, every possession you've kept just in case, quietly reminds your mind of a chapter that has already ended. The life you are trying to build cannot fully arrive while you keep decorating the rooms of the life you already left. This isn't about becoming a minimalist or believing that throwing things away magically changes your future. It's about recognizing that physical clutter often reflects the same habit we carry internally. We hold on to old conversations, old identities, old expectations, and sometimes we do the exact same thing with our homes. As you become more aware, you naturally become less interested in carrying unnecessary weight. You stop asking whether something might be useful one day and begin asking a much better question. Does this still belong in the life I'm creating now? Sometimes the answer has nothing to do with the object itself. It has everything to do with the person you've become. One of the most misunderstood parts of the spiritual path is the period where it feels like nothing you do produces the result you expected. You put in effort, you stay consistent, you make good decisions, and yet everything feels strangely still. In astrology, there is the idea of the void-of-course moon, a period associated with actions that seem unlikely to move things forward in the expected way. Whether or not you personally follow astrology, the principle behind it is surprisingly useful because almost everyone experiences seasons like this. Most people respond by trying harder. They add more goals, more plans, more pressure, convinced that if nothing is happening, the answer must be to do even more. But there is another way of looking at these periods. Ancient thinkers spoke about effortless action, the idea that forcing movement at the wrong time often creates more resistance than progress. Others practiced what became known as via negativa, discovering the right path not by endlessly adding things, but by removing what never belonged there in the first place. Sometimes life moves forward the fastest when it has fewer things to carry. What if this quiet season isn't asking you to build something new? What if it is asking you to stop feeding what has already run its course? Not every pause is empty. Some pauses are incredibly productive because they prevent you from investing more energy into directions that were never meant to last. One of the biggest reasons people begin feeling spiritually lost has nothing to do with losing their path. It has to do with collecting so many ideas that they no longer know which ones actually belong to them. They watch another video, they read another book, they save another quote, they learn another philosophy. Before long, their mind is full of answers, but their life looks almost exactly the same. Knowledge has a strange way of making us feel like we're moving even when we've been standing still. There comes a point where another explanation is no longer what you need. What you need is evidence. You need to find out whether the ideas you've been carrying can survive contact with your real life. A belief is easy to defend when it has never been tested. A truth you have never lived is still someone else's opinion. This is why some people eventually feel overwhelmed instead of enlightened. Every new idea competes with the last one, and instead of becoming clearer, everything becomes louder. The spiritual path was never meant to become a collection. It was meant to become a filter. Every lesson should make your life simpler, not more complicated. Every insight should help you remove confusion, not create another layer of it. Sometimes the reason you feel lost isn't because you need one more answer. It's because you've reached the point where the next lesson cannot be learned by listening. It can only be learned by living. And now, it's time for today's comment of the day. Discomfort is often the price of freedom. That's a hard bargain, but an honest one. Leaving what restricts you rarely feels peaceful at first. There can be uncertainty, guilt, loneliness, and the temptation to return simply because the old situation was familiar. But comfort and freedom are not always found in the same place. Sometimes you have to tolerate a difficult beginning to reach a life where you can finally breathe properly. The discomfort passes, but the freedom it leads to can change everything. Thank you for putting such a powerful idea into so few words. Most people think they want peace, but very few people realize how unfamiliar peace can actually feel. If you've spent years solving problems, rushing through responsibilities, worrying about the future, or constantly waiting for the next challenge, your mind quietly begins to accept urgency as its normal state. Then one day, life becomes calmer. Nothing is immediately wrong. Nothing needs your attention. There isn't a crisis waiting around the corner. And instead of enjoying it, you become restless. You start searching for something to fix. You replay old situations that no longer matter. You invent problems that didn't exist yesterday, not because you enjoy suffering, but because constant pressure has become familiar, and familiarity often disguises itself as safety. The mind doesn't always choose what is peaceful. It first chooses what feels familiar. Learning peace is a skill in itself because it asks you to live at a rhythm that your mind may have forgotten. It teaches you that not every quiet day is empty, not every slow season is wasted, and not every unanswered question needs to be solved immediately. Real peace isn't simply the absence of problems, it's reaching the point where your sense of stability no longer depends on having something to fight against. One of the most dangerous conclusions a person can reach is believing that their life is stuck, when in reality, it has simply remained unclaimed. Those sound almost identical, but they describe two completely different situations. A stuck life suggests there is nothing you can do because nothing is available to you. An unclaimed life suggests something else entirely. It suggests that possibilities have been appearing for a long time, but they have remained untouched because they did not arrive in the way you expected. Many people spend years waiting for certainty before they allow themselves to move. They tell themselves they will start when they feel more confident. when they have more money, when they have everyone's approval, when the timing feels perfect, or when they finally stop feeling afraid. But certainty has never been the price of meaningful change. If anything, the moments that shape your life usually begin while certainty is nowhere to be found. Think back to some of the biggest opportunities you've ever had. Chances are they didn't arrive wearing a sign that said, "This decision will change your future." They looked ordinary. They looked risky. Sometimes they even looked inconvenient. They asked you to make a choice before you could possibly know how everything would turn out. This is why so many people believe opportunity is rare. They imagine opportunity always arrives looking obvious, but most of the time it arrives disguised as responsibility. It asks you to send the message first, to accept an invitation, to learn a skill before you know whether you'll need it, to begin something while still feeling unqualified. The life that belongs to you cannot be lived by waiting until it feels impossible to fail. There is another layer to this that people rarely talk about. Sometimes the reason we don't claim what is already available has nothing to do with fear of failure. It has everything to do with how we have been conditioned to think about ourselves. We become so worried about taking up space that we slowly hand our decisions over to everybody else. We let stronger personalities choose the direction. We say yes because it feels easier than explaining why we want to say no. We stay quiet because we don't want to appear difficult. We shrink our ambitions because we don't want someone to think we've become arrogant. Over time, something subtle begins to happen. Your schedule starts reflecting other people's priorities more than your own. Your energy is spent maintaining situations you never consciously chose. Your future begins to look less like something you are building and more like something that simply happened to you. This is why spiritual growth eventually becomes practical. It is not just about becoming more aware. It is about reclaiming authorship over your own life. It means asking difficult questions that many people avoid. Am I choosing this because it is truly right for me, or because it makes someone else comfortable? Am I saying yes because I genuinely want to, or because I am afraid of what will happen if I don't? The greatest loss is not missing an opportunity. It is slowly forgetting that you were allowed to choose in the first place. There is one lesson that almost every spiritually aware person eventually has to confront, and it is one of the hardest because it doesn't involve meditation, knowledge, or understanding. It involves honesty. More specifically, it involves becoming honest even when that honesty disappoints someone else. Many of us grow up believing that being a good person means keeping everyone happy whenever possible. We learn to avoid conflict. We soften our opinions. We postpone difficult conversations. We agree to things we never wanted because we convince ourselves that protecting someone else's comfort is always the kind thing to do. At first, this seems compassionate. It even feels spiritual because it looks peaceful from the outside. But after enough years, something unexpected begins to happen. Every time you abandon your own needs to preserve someone else's expectations, you teach yourself that your inner voice matters a little less than everyone else's. Eventually, you wake up and realize that your life has become incredibly comfortable for the people around you while becoming increasingly unfamiliar to yourself. That is not kindness. That is self-abandonment wearing the mask of kindness. The truth may disappoint someone today, but pretending eventually disappoints everyone. This is why growth sometimes creates tension where there used to be none. Not because you have become selfish, but because you have stopped making silent sacrifices that nobody ever asked you to make in the first place. People who benefited from the version of you that never said no may genuinely struggle when they meet the version of you that finally has healthy boundaries. That does not automatically mean you are doing something wrong. One of the biggest misunderstandings about the spiritual path is believing that peace means avoiding discomfort at all costs. Real peace is not built by making sure nobody is ever disappointed with you. Real peace comes from knowing that your actions and your values finally agree with each other, even if that agreement is inconvenient for somebody else. Think about how many decisions people postpone because they are afraid of letting someone down. They stay in places they have already outgrown. They continue conversations that ended emotionally years ago. They keep living according to expectations that were never truly theirs because disappointing someone for one afternoon feels unbearable. But there is a hidden cost to that way of living. Every time you refuse to disappoint someone else, you quietly ask yourself to carry that disappointment instead. The weight never disappears. It simply changes shoulders. There comes a moment when the kindest thing you can do for everyone, including yourself, is to stop living a life built entirely around avoiding uncomfortable truths. That doesn't mean becoming cold or careless. It doesn't mean ignoring people's feelings or refusing to show compassion. It simply means understanding that honesty and kindness were never meant to be enemies. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can offer another person is the truth, delivered with sincerity instead of fear. The people who are meant to remain in your life will eventually learn the difference between you rejecting them and you finally choosing yourself. And if someone can only appreciate you while you are abandoning yourself, then perhaps what they loved was never really you at all. If you've stayed with me until this point, thank you for giving this message your time and attention. I hope at least one idea from this video stays with you long after it ends. You don't need to change your entire life overnight. Sometimes the biggest shift begins with one honest realization that you refuse to ignore. Keep trusting your ability to grow. Keep choosing what feels true over what feels familiar. And remember that every meaningful path is built one decision at a time.